Aggressive cues. In the context of the frustration-aggression hypothesis discussed in Chapter 2, we saw that the presence of aggressive cues in the form of weapons and other stimuli related to aggression increases the likelihood of an aggressive response. In their experiment on the famous weapons effect, Berkowitz and LePage, 1967, demonstrated that angered participants acted more aggressively towards the source of the provocation when a firearm was present in the lab room than in the presence of a badminton racket, a neutral object, or in a no-object control condition in which no objects were present. This experiment highlighted the importance of aggressive cues in the environment in triggering aggressive responses. In subsequent studies, demonstrated the effect of aggressive cues for a range of other stimuli, such as names and images of famous boxing champions. In addition, the meta-analysis by Carlson et al. Identified an effect, albeit weaker, of aggressive cues on participants in a neutral mood state, which suggests that negative arousal may not be a necessary condition for situational cues to affect aggressive behavior. A meta-analysis including 151 effect size estimates from 78 independent studies confirmed that the presence of aggressive cues increases the likelihood of aggressive thoughts, hostile appraisals, and aggressive behavior. However, the effects are in the small range, and the measures used to assess aggressive behavior vary substantially between studies. Bushman et al. 2017 demonstrated the weapons effect in the context of driving behavior. In a driving simulator, their participants had to maneuver a car in a simulated driving environment. They were told to reach a destination as fast as possible, and experienced a series of frustrating situations during the drive, e.g., a car pulling out in front of them, progress impeded by a traffic jam. On the passenger seat, one group had a pistol and the other group a tennis racket lying there, ostensibly left behind by a previous experimenter. Speeding, defined as driving faster than 50 miles per hour, and tailgating, defined by the distance allowed to the car driving in front on the simulated road, were used as measures of aggressive behavior. In the presence of the pistol, participants drove faster and were more likely to drive too close to the car in front than in the presence of the tennis racket. See also Chapter 7 for a discussion of research on aggressive driving. The psychological mechanism underlying the impact of aggressive cues on aggressive cognitions and behavior is referred to as priming. Primes are stimuli that activate specific mental concepts, which in turn feed into subsequent judgments and behaviors. For example, media depictions of violence, words with an aggressive meaning, or names of people associated with violent crime activate a network of aggression-related thoughts. Being exposed to these stimuli facilitates the ease with which aggressive cognitions come to mind and the likelihood that aggressive behavior will be shown. Using a standard reaction time paradigm, Anderson et al. 1998 showed that exposure to weapon primes does indeed enhance the accessibility of aggression-related cognitions, even in individuals who were not previously angered or frustrated. They presented their participants with a series of word pairs, with the first word of each pair acting as a prime. Primes were either aggression-related, weapon words, or neutral, animal words. Following the silent reading of the prime word, participants were instructed to read the second, target word, of the pair out loud as fast as they could. Reaction times for reading the target word were used as the dependent variable. The target word was either aggression-related or neutral. As aggressive primes were assumed to activate aggressive thoughts, it was predicted that weapon primes would lead to shorter reaction times when reading aggressive target words compared with either neutral target words or animal primes. The findings from the study are presented in Figure 5.4. Figure 5.4 Effects of aggressive versus non-aggressive primes on reaction times for aggressive and neutral target words. Okay, so the y-axis is measuring reaction time in milliseconds from 675 to 700, and it's a side-by-side bar graph with the two categories on the x-axis being aggressive target words and non-aggressive target words, and the bars being weapon word primes or animal word primes. Okay, so when you prime with a weapon word, then the aggressive target word is reacted to quite quickly. When you prime with a weapon word and the target word is about an animal, that does not prime animal words, so you react to more slowly. And when the target words are non-aggressive, it doesn't matter whether you use a weapon word first or an animal word first, neither primes any reaction time effect. As predicted, participants were significantly faster in reading out aggressive target words when they had been primed by a weapon word than when the prime had been an animal word. Moreover, reaction times within the aggressive prime group were shorter for the aggressive than for the non-aggressive target words. A second study conducted by Anderson et al. 1998, using visual stimuli as primes, pictures of weapons versus pictures of plants, confirmed these results. If aggressive cues promote aggressive behavior by activating a network of associated cognitions, they may also have an indirect effect by linking initially neutral thoughts to the aggressive meaning of the cue. This was shown in a study by Bushing and Craigie 2013, who made their participants play a violent video game, either in the context of a city environment or in the context of a ship environment. Afterwards, they used either city-related or ship-related words as primes, presented before a lexical decision task, in which participants had to decide as fast as possible if a string of letters was a meaningful word or not. Both aggression-related and neutral words were used in the lexical decision task. As predicted, participants who had played the violent video game in the ship environment were faster in recognizing aggression-related words following the ship words as primes than following the city words, whereas participants who had played the game in a city environment were faster when primed with city-related than with ship-related words. This indicates that the initially neutral words related to ships or cities were charged with aggressive meaning because they had been encountered together with violent cues in the video game and subsequently served to facilitate the activation of aggressive cognitions. Most research on the weapon's effect was conducted in artificial laboratory settings. In a rare field experiment, police officers in London were randomly equipped with a taser, a non-lethal weapon that may be used to incapacitate a violent suspect, or went on duty without a taser. The results provide further support for the weapon's effect. The presence of a taser was linked to significantly more assaulting behavior against officers by suspects and greater use of force by the officers, compared with incidents where no taser was present. As a practical recommendation, the authors propose that tasers, which have been shown to be effective in reducing lethal force in police operations, should not be carried to be visible, but concealed from sight to prevent them from working as aggressive cues. In combination, research on the weapon's effect in both controlled laboratory situations and field settings has important implications for the understanding of aggression in natural, everyday contexts. Weapons and other objects or images associated with aggression are widely available in a variety of social settings. They are an integral part of children's toy boxes and video game libraries, and omnipresent in the world of film and television. The more frequently such cues are encountered, the more easily aggressive cognitions and behavioral response options are activated, making them chronically accessible over time. We can conclude from the research discussed in this section that repeated exposure to aggressive cues is one of the pathways that contribute to the emergence of individual differences in the proneness to aggression. Availability of firearms. Easy access to a firearm is a further situational factor relevant for explaining aggressive behavior. Although firearms are not considered the primary cause of aggressive confrontations, availability of firearms increases the risk of serious and potentially fatal injuries, especially when violence is not planned and premeditated. Having a gun within reach may precipitate the formation and implementation of intentions to shoot. Gun-related violence is a major problem around the world, although countries vary in the ease with which firearms may be acquired and the prevalence of gun ownership. This is illustrated in Table 5.1, which presents a list of the 25 countries with the highest rate of gun ownership from a recent international survey. In the U.S., which features top of the list in Table 5.1, About 11,000 intentional killings involving a firearm were recorded in the first 10 months of 2019, and 280 incidents of mass shootings, defined as 4 or more persons shot and or killed in a single incident, happened during the same period. Recent incidents of mass shootings, such as the tragedy at Parkland High School in Florida in February 2018, have triggered campaigns demanding a tightening of gun laws and a reduction of the number of firearms in the hands of private individuals. To assess whether this approach would be likely to reduce aggression and violence, evidence is needed to show that firearm availability and aggression are indeed linked. The issue of tighter gun control legislation as a policy strategy for preventing violence will be discussed in Chapter 12. Firearm availability. Easy access to firearms as a risk factor for violence. Table 5.1. 25 countries with the highest rate of gun ownership. Rate per 100 residents. Wow, there's 120.5 guns per 100 residents in the US. It's more than one gun per person. No way, right? Oh wow, Canada has 34.7 guns per 100 residents. It's actually not very far down on the list. It's fifth on the list. A large body of correlational evidence on the association between firearm availability and violence in statistical data at the level of societies has shown that a higher number of firearms in a state or country is linked to higher rates of homicides and other violent offenses. Although outside the scope of this discussion, it should also be noted that significant associations between rates of gun ownership and suicide have been documented. The problem with correlational studies of this kind is that they cannot establish the direction of causality. Higher rates of gun ownership could lead to more violence, or people might buy more guns in response to higher violence rates. To decide between these two hypotheses, quasi-experimental studies have been conducted, which have looked at the link between gun ownership and violence at the individual level. These studies have compared gun ownership rates in individuals convicted for violent crime with non-offenders from the general population and demonstrated that violent offenders were more likely to have owned a gun than the non-offender comparison groups. Although such quasi-experimental studies are faced with the challenge that the two groups are likely to differ on variables other than gun ownership, they are the closest approximation to addressing the causal influence of gun availability. Given that it is impossible to conduct true experimental studies that manipulate gun ownership to observe differences in rates of serious violence or murder. If homicides were the reason for buying guns rather than guns being the cause of homicide, the correlation would be expected for homicides generally, regardless of whether they occur between strangers or non-strangers. However, empirical data indicate that gun ownership is more closely related to homicide between non-strangers than between strangers, which provides circumstantial evidence for the claim that the availability of gun precipitates violent behavior rather than the other way around. In addition, individuals who live in households where guns are kept were found to have a substantially higher risk of being murdered than individuals in households where no guns are available. This difference may be explained by the facilitating effect of guns, which means that access to guns makes conflicts more likely to end in violence and death. Having a gun at hand increases the odds that intentions to kill will be translated into action and result in death or serious injury. In addition to increasing the odds that intentions to harm will result in severe injury or death, the widespread availability of guns may also have a causal role to play in violent behavior. As we discussed earlier, guns are aggressive cues that were shown to augment the effect of a frustration on aggressive behavior. Thus, they may create an intention to harm by activating aggressive cognitions, thereby increasing the likelihood of aggressive behavior, whether with the use of a gun or by other means. This reasoning is supported by the finding that handling a toy gun led to an increase in testosterone levels in men and made them show more aggressive behavior. The finding discussed earlier that openly carrying tasers by police officers was linked to more aggressive behavior in interactions between police and suspects also shows that the mere exposure to weapons as aggressive cues may increase the odds of aggressive behavior in the situation. Offering a motivational account of the psychological functions of gun ownership, a series of studies by Leander et al. 2019, conducted in the wake of 3 mass shootings in the U.S., showed that gun owners were more likely to justify the use of firearms and say they would use firearms for self-protection after they had experienced failure, and this effect was mediated by a greater perception of guns as a means of empowerment in the group that experienced failure than in the control group. However, this mediated pathway was found only among those participants for whom mass shootings were salient, who perceived a high threat of becoming a victim of a mass shooting. The authors concluded that when individuals' sense of personal control and significance is threatened, for example by failure, guns become a means of restoring a sense of power when gun-related cues are salient. The link between weapons and empowerment also ties in with the finding that men are more likely to own a gun than are women. Guns are closely related to traditional notions of masculinity, which is reinforced by entertainment media.